Greetings, everyone in the Facebook land or the YouTube land. This is Reverend Mama Kathy coming to you on Tuesday, which is May the 5th, also known as Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo here in DC used to be a big party time. I don't know how big a party it'll be tonight. But anyway, happy Cinco de Mayo and Ramadan Mubarak for those who are going through the Ramadan season. Greetings, and we're back with the 14th chapter of the Kybalion, written by the three initiates, initially in 1908, published by Yogi Publication Society, and in the public domain. I was having a conversation with a sister friend of mine this morning about the archaic or arcane language that the Kybalion is written in, which can make it challenging for many to read independently, and it may be challenging for people to listen to. Excuse me, Ziggy is having a moment here with his squeaky ball. So forgive me for that. And so I'm hoping that although the language is a little stilted, very formal, to understand that this is basic, it's science, it's mathematics. The Kybalion is not a text around the stories that we know of in the Bible or the Torah or the Quran. So in other words, it's not based on myth and mythology. It's based on logos, the word. It's based on mathematics. It's based on science. And the theory is that if you can, in fact, master these universal principles or come to understand them at least, then you can have a better understanding of how the universe works and where you fall in it and it in you. All right? Think about it. You are a part of the universe, and it is also a part of you. So the 14th chapter is just going over mental gender. Yesterday we talked about gender. So I'm just going to briefly go through just simply the theory. The first theory is that all is mind. Okay, and so when we talk about the all in all, we're talking about the universe, spirit, and that the universe is mental. That's the first concept of the Kybalion. The second concept, which I think many of us are familiar with, is as above, so below. All right? So that's a principle, a universal principle. As above, so below. So look at what's happening on this level. It shows you what's going on in the other, and vice versa. The principle of vibration, nothing is ever at rest. Everything is always moving. Even if it looks like it is still static matter, it is moving matter. The other principle of polarity that we talked about a few days ago has to do with the fact that everything is dual. So everything has poles. You have hot and cold. You have day and night. You have, all these dualities going on. Okay. That like and unlike are the same. It's just that they're on opposite ends of the pole. Okay, so there's opposites in everything that we're dealing with, all right? That extremes come together, they meet on occasion. We talked about all truths being half-truths, and we talked about the fact that things that seem paradoxical can in fact be reconciled. Then we went to the fact that everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides, its ebb, its flow, its rise and fall, like the pendulum swinging left and right. And that the measure of the swing to the left is going to be the same measure of the swing to the right. Rhythm has a way of compensating. Another basic principle of the Kybalion, which I think all of us know, is that everything has its cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. every cause has its effect. So it happens according to law, universal law. And that chance is just a name for the law that is not recognized. There's really no such thing as chance. It's just a name we give something when we are not recognizing that the law is at work and that the causation occurs on many planes, but nothing ever escapes the law of cause and effect. And yesterday we spoke about gender, that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and its feminine principles. And again, gender manifests on all planes. On all planes, gender manifests. So that's just a brief summary of what we have been reading for the past 14 days. Okay? So let's go to chapter 14, mental gender. Read along with me if you have your book or your PDF, and we will begin. Students of psychology who have followed the modern trend of thought along the lines of mental phenomena are struck by the persistence of the dual mind idea, which has manifested itself so strongly during the past 10 or 15 years, and which has given rise to a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. The late Thomas J. Hudson attained great popularity in 1893 by advancing his well-known theory of the objective and the subjective minds, which he held existed in every individual. Other writers have attracted almost equal attention by the theories regarding the conscious and the subconscious minds, the voluntary and the involuntary minds, the active and passive minds, etc., etc. The theories of the various writers differ from each other, but there remains the underlying principle of the duality of mind. The student of the Hermetic philosophy is tempted to smile when he reads and learns of these many new theories regarding the duality of mind, each school adhering tenaciously to its own pet theories and each claiming to have discovered the truth. The student turns back the pages of occult history, and way back in the dim beginnings of occult teachings, he finds references to the ancient Hermetic doctrine of the principle of gender on the mental plane, the manifestation of mental gender. And examining further, the student finds that the ancient philosophy took cognizance of the phenomenon of the dual mind and accounted for it by the theory of mental gender. This idea of mental gender may be explained in a few words to students who are familiar with the modern theories just alluded to. The masculine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called objective mind, conscious mind, voluntary mind, active mind, etc. And the feminine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called subjective mind, subconscious mind, involuntary mind, passive mind, etc. So you have the yang and the yin. Of course, the Hermetic teachings do not agree with the many modern theories regarding the nature of the two phases of mind, nor does it admit many of the facts claimed for the two respective aspects. Some of the said theories and claims being very far-fetched and incapable of standing the test of experiment and demonstration. We point to the phases of agreement merely for the purpose of helping the students to assimilate his previously acquired knowledge with the teachings of the Hermetic philosophy. Students of Hudson will notice the statement at the beginning of his second chapter of the Law of Psychic Phenomena that, in quotes, the mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophy discloses the same general idea, that is, the duality of mind. If Dr. Hudson had taken the time and trouble to decipher a little of the mystic jargon of the Hermetic philosophy, he might have received much light upon the subject of the dual mind, but then perhaps his most interesting work might not have been written. Let us now consider the Hermetic teachings regarding the mental gender. The Hermetic teachers impart their instruction regarding this subject by bidding their students examine the report of their consciousness regarding their self, with a capital S. Not your lower self, but your higher self. The students are bidden to turn their attention inward upon the self dwelling within each. Each student is led to see that his consciousness gives him first a report of the existence of his self. The report is, I am. This at first seems to be the final words from the consciousness, but a little further examination discloses the fact that this I am may be separated or split into two distinct parts or aspects, which while working in unison and in conjunction, yet nevertheless may be separated in consciousness. While at first there seems to be only an I existing, a more careful and closer examination reveals the fact that there exists an I and a me. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and an examination of their nature and the phenomena arising from the same will throw much light upon many of the problems of mental influence. Let us begin with a consideration of the me with a capital M, which is usually mistaken for the I by the student, until he presses the inquiry a little further back into the recesses of consciousness. A man or woman thinks of his or her self, in parentheses, in its aspect of me, parentheses closed, as being composed of certain feelings, tastes, likes, dislikes, habits, peculiar ties, characteristics, etc., all of which go to make up his personality or her personality or the self known to himself or herself and others. He or she knows that these emotions and feelings change. They are born and they die away, are subject to the principle of rhythm and the principle of polarity, which take her or him from one extreme of finding or feeling, to another. So, he or she also thinks of the me as being certain knowledge gathered together in his or her mind, and thus forming a part of his or herself. This is the me of a man or a woman. But we have proceeded too hastily. The me of many men may be said to consist largely of their consciousness of the body and their physical appetites, etc. Their consciousness being largely bound up with their bodily nature, they practically live there. Some men or women even go so far as to regard their personal apparel as a part of their me, and actually to seem to consider it a part of themselves. A writer has humorously said that men consist of three parts: soul, body, and clothes. These clothes-conscious people would lose their personality if divested of their clothing by savages upon the occasion of a shipwreck. But even many who are not so closely bound up with the idea of personal raiment stick closely to the consciousness of their bodies being their me. They cannot conceive of a self independent of the body. Their mind seems to them to be practically a something belonging to their body, which in many cases it is indeed. But as man or woman rises in the scale of consciousness, he or she is able to disentangle his or her me from the idea of body, and is able to think of their body as belonging to the mental part of themselves. But even then, he or she is very apt to identify the me entirely with the mental states, feelings, etc., which he or she feels to exist within themselves. He or she is very apt to consider these internal states as identical with him or herself, instead of there being simply things produced by some part of his mentality and existing within him, of him, and in him, but still not himself. He sees that he may change these internal states of feelings by an effort of will, and that he may produce a feeling or state of an exactly opposite nature in the same way, and yet the same me exists. And so, after a while, she is able to set aside these various mental states, emotions, feelings, habits, qualities, characteristics, and other personal mental belongings. She is able to set them aside in the not me collections of curiosities and encumbrances, as well as valuable possessions. This requires much mental concentration and power of mental analysis on the part of the student. But still, the task is possible for the advanced student, and even those not so far advanced are able to see in the imagination how the process may be performed. After this laying aside process has been performed, the student will find herself in conscious possession of a self, which may be considered in its I and me dual aspects. The me will be felt to be a something mental in which thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings, and other mental states may be produced. It may be considered as the mental womb, as the elements styled it, capable of generating mental offspring. It reports to the consciousness as a me, with latent powers of creation and generation of mental progeny of all sorts and kinds. Its powers of creative energy are felt to be enormous, but still, it seems to be conscious that it must receive some form of energy from either its I companion or else from some other I, ere it is able to bring into being its mental creations. This consciousness brings with it a realization of an enormous capacity for mental work and creative ability. But the student soon finds that this is not all that he or she finds within their inner consciousness. She finds that there exists a mental something which is able to will that the me act along certain creative lines, and which is also able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. This part of him or herself, she or he is taught to call their I. They are able to rest in its consciousness at will. She finds that there's not a consciousness of an ability to generate and actively create in the sense of the gradual process attendant upon mental operations, but rather a sense and consciousness of an ability to project an energy from the I to the me, a process of willing that the mental creation begin and proceed. He or she also finds that the I is able to stand aside and witness the operation of the me's mental creation and generation. There is this dual aspect in the mind of every person. The I represents the masculine principle of mental gender. The me represents the feminine principle. The I represents the aspect of being. The me, the aspect of becoming. I'll read it again. The I represents the masculine principle of mental gender. The me represents the female principle. The I represents the aspect of being. The me, the aspect of becoming. The I has the capacity, as it said earlier, to stand back and observe, watch the mental creations of the me. You will notice that the principle of correspondence operates on this plane just as it does upon the great plane upon which the creation of universes is performed. The two are similar in kind, although vastly different in degree. As above, so below. As below, so above. These aspects of mind, the masculine and feminine principles, the I and the me, considered in connection with the well-known mental and psychic phenomena, give the master key to these dimly known regions of mental operation and manifestation. The principle of mental gender gives the truth underlying the whole field of the phenomena of mental influence, etc. The tendency of the feminine principle is always in the direction of receiving impressions, while the tendency of the masculine principle is always in the direction of giving out or expressing. The feminine principle has a much more varied field of operation than the masculine principle. The feminine principle conducts the work of generating new thoughts, concepts, ideas, including the work of the imagination. The masculine principle contents itself with the work of the will in its varied phases. And yet, without the active aid of the will of the masculine principle, the feminine principle is apt to rest content with generating mental images which are the result of impressions received from outside instead of producing original mental creation. Persons who can give continued attention and thought to a subject actively employ both of the mental principles, the feminine in the work of active mental generation, and the masculine will in stimulating and energizing the creative portion of the mind. The majority of persons really employ the masculine principle but little, and are content to live according to the thoughts and ideas instilled into the me from the eye of other minds. But it is not our purpose to dwell upon this phase of the subject, which may be studied from any good textbook upon psychology, with the key that we have given you regarding mental gender. The student of psychic phenomena is aware of the wonderful phenomena classified under the head of telepathy, thought transference, mental influence, suggestion, hypnotism, etc. Many have sought for an explanation of these varied phases of phenomena under the theories of the various dual mind teachers. And in a measure, they are right. For there is clearly a manifestation of two distinct phases of mental activity. But if such students will consider these dual minds in the light of the Hermetic teachings regarding vibrations and mental gender, they will see that the long sought for key is at hand. In the phenomena of telepathy, it is seen how the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is projected toward the feminine principle of another person. And the latter takes the seed thought and allows it to develop into maturity. In the same way, suggestion and hypnotism operate. The masculine principle of the person giving the suggestion directs a stream of vibratory energy or willpower toward the feminine principle of the other person. And the latter, accepting it, makes its own and acts and thinks accordingly. An idea thus lodged in the mind of another person grows and develops, and in time is regarded as the rightful mental offspring of the individual, whereas it is in reality like the cuckoo egg placed in the sparrow's nest, where it destroys the rightful offspring and makes itself at home. The normal method is for the masculine and feminine principle in a person's mind to coordinate and act harmoniously in conjunction with each other. But unfortunately, the masculine principle in the average person is too lazy to act. The display of willpower is too slight. And the consequence is that such persons are ruled almost entirely by the minds and the wills of other persons whom they allow. We know how this is. How few original thoughts or original actions are performed by the average person. Are not the majority of persons mere shadows and echoes of others having stronger wills or minds than themselves? The trouble is that the average person dwells almost together in his me consciousness and does not realize that he has such a thing as an I. He is polarized in his feminine principle of mind, and the masculine principle, which is lodged in the will, is allowed to remain inactive and not employed. All right. So you got a will, and you got to use it. The strong men and women of the world invariably manifest the masculine principle of will, and their strength depends materially upon this fact. Instead of living upon the impressions made upon their minds by others, they dominate their own minds by their will, obtaining the kind of mental images desired, and moreover dominate the minds of others likewise in the same manner. Look at the strong people, how they manage to implant their seed thoughts in the minds of the masses of the people, thus causing the latter to think thoughts in accordance with the desires and will of the strong individuals. This is why the masses of people are such sheep-like creatures, never originating an idea of their own, nor using their own powers of mental activity. The manifestations of mental gender may be noticed all around, as in everyday life. The magnetic persons are those who are able to use the masculine principle in the way of impressing their ideas upon others. The actor who makes people weep or cry as he wills is employing this principle. And so is the successful orator, statesman, preacher, writer, or other people who are before the public attention. The peculiar influence exerted by some people over others is due to the manifestation of mental gender along the vibrational lines above indicated. In this principle lies the secret of personal magnetism, personal influence, fascination, etc., as well as the phenomena generally grouped under the name hypnotism. The student who has familiarized himself with the phenomena generally spoken of as psychic will have discovered the important part played in the said phenomena by that force which science has styled suggestion, by which term is meant the process or method whereby an idea is transferred to or impressed upon the mind of another, causing the second mind to act in accordance therewith. A correct understanding of suggestion is necessary in order to intelligently comprehend the varied psychical phenomena which suggestion underlies. But still, more is a knowledge of vibration and mental gender necessary for the student of suggestion. For the whole principle of suggestion depends upon the principle of mental gender and vibration. It is customary for the writers and teachers of suggestion to explain that it is the objective or voluntary mind which makes the mental impression or suggestion upon the subjective or involuntary mind. But they do not describe the process or give us any analogy in nature whereby we may readily comprehend this idea. But if you will think of the matter in the light of the Hermetic teachings, you will be able to see that the energizing of the feminine principle by the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is in accordance to the universal laws of nature, and that the natural world affords countless analogies whereby the principle may be understood. In fact, the Hermetic teachings show that the very creation of the universe follows the same law, and that in all creative manifestations upon the planes of the spiritual, the mental, and the physical, there is always in operation this principle of gender, this manifestation of the masculine and the feminine principle. As above, so below. As below, so above. And more than this, when the principle of mental gender is once grasped and understood, the varied phenomena of psychology at once becomes capable of intelligent classification and study instead of being very much in the dark. This principle works out in practice because it is based upon the immutable universal laws of life. We shall not enter into an extended discussion of or description of the varied phenomena of mental influence or psychic activity. There are many books, many of them quite good, which have been written and published on this subject of late years and even later years. Since this was written in 1908, there are millions of books out there about mental influence and psychic activity. The main facts stated in these various books are correct, although the several writers have attempted to explain the phenomena by various pet theories of their own. The student may acquaint himself with these matters, and by using the theory of mental gender, he or she will be able to bring order out of the chaos of conflicting theory and teachings, and may, moreover, readily make him or herself a master of the subject if he or she is inclined. The purpose of this work is not to give an extended account of psychic phenomena, but rather to give to the student a master key, whereby he or she may unlock the many doors leading into the parts of the temple of knowledge which he or she may wish to explore. We feel that in this consideration of the teachings of the Kybalion, one may find an explanation which will serve to clear away many perplexing difficulties, a key that will unlock many doors. What is the use of going into detail regarding all of the many features of psychic phenomena and mental science, provided we place in the hands of the student the means whereby he or she may acquaint themselves fully regarding any phase of the subject which may interest him or her? With the aid of the Kybalion, one may go through any occult library anew, the old light from Egypt illuminating many dark pages and obscure subjects. That is the purpose of this book. We do not come expounding a new philosophy, but rather furnishing the outlines of a great world-old teaching, which will make clear the teachings of others, which will serve as a great reconciler of different theories and opposing doctrines, and I would dare say, different religions. This is not religious. Something that is not about religion. It is about universal law and principle, which is found in the texts of religions. The laws that were known by the mystics. The mystic understood the universal laws and was therefore able to create the miracles in the lives of himself and others, and even on the plane of matter. So, I hope this helps. I'll read your comments. The principle of mental gender. Tomorrow is our last chapter for the Kybalion, and I will probably spend a little bit of time, talking, but it's on Hermetic axioms. Just so you know, Hermes Trismegistus was, they say he lived around the time of Abraham, and this is ancient Egypt teaching. This is ancient Egypt's teaching. The East, Eastern religions and peoples of the East understand these texts and have been exposed to them, I believe, more readily than many of us in the West. And they spend a lot more time working with these principles. Meditation is the key. I believe when one does spend time in meditation, just taking a few words or taking the principles and and just sitting with them in meditation, you can come to a better understanding. We, in our culture, have not grown up spending a lot of time studying universal law, even though it's all around. For me, as a young person, I was totally disinterested in science. But if I could have understood a little more clearly some of the basic science, which is here, correspondence, polarity, vibration, mental, the universe being mental, understanding that for me, the God principle is masculine, the will, and the feminine principle is Holy Spirit. That has helped me a lot as when I read this particular text and other texts, A Course in Miracles as well. So anyway, that's an aside. I'm grateful for you all bearing witness to the reading of the Kybalion. It is not the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is Jewish, esoteric Jewish teachings of the Jewish tradition. The Kybalion is ancient Hermetic teachings based out of Egypt, just so you don't get the two confused. The Kabbalah and the Kybalion. All right? Okay, so thank you so much. Tomorrow we'll be back at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Hermetic Axiom out of the Kybalion. Thank you so much. God bless you. Be safe. Namaste. And blessings. Ramadan Mubarak.